Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie Eldred, and I'm with the Center for Best Practices here at Share Our Strengths No Kid Hungry. Thank you for joining us today for the Collaborative Planning webinar. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items I'd like to cover. First, attendees are in listen-only mode. We will be recording this webinar today and will circulate the slides and webinar recording at a later date. We will also be taking questions at the end of the webinar. Please use the question box for your questions and we will read them out loud or respond to them individually. So, without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague Derek Lambert to start the webinar.
Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for today's Collaborative Planning webinar where we're going to learn about ways to build community and leverage resources to strengthen summer meals programming. Want to welcome you to the first of our Schools Out, Foods In Summer Meals webinar series that will be running monthly through June, here to provide tools, resources, and stories from around the country to help you build and plan your own summer meals program in your community. So we're really glad to have you here. Want to thank our sponsor, the Arby's Foundation, for their great support of the work that we do here at the Center for Best Practices. They make it possible for us to host this webinar series and to provide a host of other resources to folks throughout the rest of the year. So a thanks to our sponsor. And also I want to thank our speakers who will be here today. Ellen Eichenbaum, Operations Associate from No Kid Hungry, Virginia, is one of our panelists. And also we'll be joined a little bit, actually first, by Sue Graff, Director of Community Investments of the United Way of Windham County, Vermont. So special thanks to our speakers. I'll be presenting them in greater detail, providing a little background on their professional bio as they get ready to speak during the webinar. Want to review our agenda. We're going to go through 5 key areas today. We're going to look at collaborative planning, what it is, why it's helpful, and we're going to include key elements of successful collaboration. We're also going to provide a resource review of No Kid Hungry's online collaborative planning toolkit that you can access at all times to initiate or expand collaborative planning activities in your community. We also have a lot of templates that we'll review, and then we'll look at collaboration in action. Areas for collaboration, venues, places in your community where you can leverage this resource and begin collaborative planning. We'll look at an example from Vermont, an impact model of collaboration with the United Way of Windham County, Vermont. And then we'll connect with our partner down in No Kid Hungry, Virginia, and look at their work to develop and expand work with regional sponsor councils, which have provided an avenue for training, mentorship, and growth with sponsors in the area. We'll look at key takeaways from all of these stories and resources, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers, which, as Stephanie mentioned, we'll just ask folks to enter into the chat box, and then we will go through those questions one by one with the time that we have remaining, and then we'll close it out and let you know about the time and the date for our next webinar in February. So let's go ahead and get started. What is collaborative planning? What is it? Why is it helpful? First, let's start about what is it. You see the 3 images there. Basically, that illustrates the fact that collaborative planning is a meeting format. It's a kind of meeting that allows for multiple stakeholders to plan together to address complex problems and identify innovative solutions. It's an approach that encourages the participation of a wide range of actors that are working together to identify and manage potential sources of conflict to reach new, innovative solutions that no individual actor could achieve on their own. Collaborative planning helps in several different ways. It's helpful in that it helps build and strengthen relationships among diverse stakeholders. It helps to identify barriers to working together to achieve shared goals. It helps to uncover new ideas and opportunities for working together, align resources among many different actors around the most promising strategies. And because of these different steps, we can improve and strengthen our results through shared efforts. As you know, adapting this to the summer meals context, summer meals can be a difficult time to deliver services and to keep kids, make sure that kids have access to meals where they live, learn, and play. With the end of the school day, with the end of the structure of the school day, it can sometimes be difficult to bring together all of the different actors, all of the different resources that we need to make meals available. Collaborative planning is a key strategy to improve outcomes in leveraging community resources to have programs that are sufficient and sustainable at reaching kids in a way that they can count on year after year. So let's go on and look at the key elements of a successful collaborative planning process. Going beyond what it is and why it's helpful, let's look at the key elements. You need people, you need the right people, you need an appropriate space, you have necessary materials, there are ground rules that govern the order of a meeting, you need a purpose, why are we meeting, what are we going to cover, that's the question of the agenda, and then there is the actual facilitative process whereby you're able to plan collaboratively to implement solutions. So let's go one by one through those and see how we can make sure that the right pieces are in place for a successful process to occur. The first key element is the people. The first part is making sure that we have the right folks in the room to implement a collaborative planning process. If you don't have the right people in the room, you can consider that an added barrier to achieving your goals. Those goals may not be reached, or even if you do eventually reach them, it may take longer to get there. When you do have the right people in the room, more questions can be addressed in real time with knowledge and authority, allowing the group to move further faster. If you don't have the right people there to decide on an action, and if you don't have buy-in from everyone that you need, then you may encounter unexpected opposition further down the road. And that's one of the goals of this, is to identify potential sources of conflict, to manage them, and to be able to take decisions that are agreed upon by all parties. Having the right people in the room is a very important part of that. One important piece to making sure you have the right people is to extend a powerful invitation that answers the following. What are we going to do, and why should I be there? If you can answer what we're going to do, what the goal is, which gets to the purpose that we'll cover later, and why should they be there, then you're much more likely to get the right people in the room for the meeting to occur. To get people to attend, you may need to access multiple channels. You may need to contact people by email, you may need to call them, or you may need to even go in for an in-person meeting. Whatever's necessary to get a response. So one of the things about getting the right people is also accessing, tapping into those networks in the right way. It may be something you do directly, or you may reach out through a colleague or a contact to be able to contact people in other organizations to attend a collaborative meeting. The next piece is the space. The meeting space for a collaborative meeting should meet the following criteria. It should be sufficient. It should be large enough to comfortably fit all participants. It should be accessible. There should be enough parking. It should be handicap accessible. Physical needs need to be met, so people can't meet if they're uncomfortable. So if there's not access to a bathroom, or people don't know where it's at, access to a water fountain or coffee, depending on when the meeting occurs, and a seating arrangement that's conducive to meaningful interaction. What we found in our work, working with groups and communities on collaborative planning, is that having people sit in a circle or in a horseshoe table pattern is the most conducive to having people actually share their ideas, bounce ideas off one another in a collaborative setting. If you're in a classroom setting or people are seated in rows, they may feel like they're part of an audience, not part of a collaborative group where their ideas are valued. So thinking about a sufficient space that's accessible, where needs are met, and that folks are seated in ways that encourage participation. Another key element is having the right materials. One of the things that we say is that to make sure you have the right materials, it's best to think in terms of the essential tasks. You need to be able to document attendance, display the meeting purpose and agenda at all times, and take notes during the meeting. We find that flip charts and easels are the most adaptable materials. I say that because you don't have to have a computer and you don't have to have a projector. Depending on where you're meeting, depending on the community you're in or the access to meeting space, you may or may not have access to a computer or a projector. So flip charts and easels are a good way to use that. If you have a post-it flip chart they can post on the wall, that's ideal, but it's not necessary. Sharpie or dry erase markers to take notes. One note I will make here is that the meeting leader or facilitator is always writing. You're always taking notes based on what people's ideas are and based on the discussion of the group. So having something to take notes with. When it's time to prioritize or make decisions, sticky notes or adhesive dots can be great tools to establish consensus, to make decisions, to be able to move through your agenda. So by looking at the essential tasks that need to be achieved, it helps us think through the materials that we need to be in the room. And these are helpful to think about in advance so you're not caught flat-footed. Another important element is ground rules. Ground rules are a code of conduct that all members of the group agree to abide by. These are rules, and you see them there on the slide, a set of rules that we can review. They help clarify expectations, reflect agreement in the room, and distinguish the meeting from those other folks may attend. It also helps in case folks are not abiding by those rules to have a comfortable course correction when problems do arise. Ground rules should be visible on the wall or on a board or written at all times. We have some examples here. You're not limited to these, but these are examples that you could use of start on time, stay on time, stop on time. One of the things that we find is the most important in a collaborative planning and any other meeting process is to commit yourself to respecting others' time. And by starting on time and stopping on time and doing your best to stay on time and making clear adjustments when needed, you're showing people that respect that they can then reflect back to you as a meeting leader. Letting folks know that all ideas are valued, challenging people to step up and share their ideas, but then also to step back and to let others participate fully. Using the parking lot, it's really important to have a place somewhere off of the main notes board where you can put ideas that maybe are not relevant to the specific discussion you're having on your agenda, but that is an idea to return to. It's a place to put ideas that don't address the problem or the issue or the activity of the day, but that will be taken up at a later point in time. It also is a great way to show respect for people's contributions, even if they are not directly relevant to the task at hand. And finally, defining consensus as a group, saying that consensus really means I can live with and support a decision. I may be enthusiastic about it. I may be less than enthusiastic about it. But if I feel like this is a decision that we as a group can move forward with, that is the definition of consensus. By reviewing these together at the beginning of a meeting and agreeing to abide by them, it gives you a strong context from which to operate for the remainder of the meeting and subsequent meetings. The next key element is the purpose. It's absolutely essential to understand why your group exists. In other words, what's the task that you've come together to accomplish? The question you ask will largely determine the direction your group takes. And I know this might seem obvious, but actually often it isn't. In some cases, the problems that we try to solve are actually symptoms of something deeper that needs to be addressed. Just to give you an example related to summer meals, if we ask the question, where can we get additional funding to expand our summer meals program in 2017, that's a good question, but it's actually a little bit limiting. If our goal is to expand the program, a better question might be, what additional resources or assets can we leverage to expand our programming in 2017? This can allow for a conversation that includes a diverse range of partnerships, volunteers, in-kind support, as well as the possibility of increased funding, because we know that funding does help. But by opening it up and asking a larger question about the assets that may be available, you can bring in more people who can productively engage in the conversation. You may find a wider range of creative ideas and partnerships to support programming. So asking the right question and thinking very clearly about what the purpose of the meeting is. Why are we meeting? What is the challenge? And what is our task? Not only is it a way to engage people and bring them into the conversation, it's a way to launch your group in a direction that's going to allow you to be very dynamic and solutions-oriented. As a follow-up to that, another key element is the agenda. Just as it's important to know the question being asked, participants and leaders need to know where they're going. If the meeting purpose defines the destination, the agenda is part of the roadmap. It needs to be clearly displayed at all times for folks to see, either printed, it can be a printed agenda, it can also be something written on a board. Use the agenda as a launching pad to say, help to reinforce once people are in the room why they're there, the important part they can play in creating a new outcome, creating something new in the community, or improving on something that is already existing, helping people understand how this group is going to be a part of that solution, empowering people that are in the room and that are a part of the collaborative planning work group, and then diving right in and getting into tangible agenda items so that people understand what it is that they're there to accomplish. When you review the agenda at the beginning of the meeting, it's helpful to confirm buy-in, make sure that people agree that this is what we're here to do. If there need to be any adjustments, being open to that can be helpful. The agenda that you set doesn't have to be written in stone. It is a guide, and if there is a need for adjustment, that can be accommodated. A very important thing to do is to preview at the beginning where you're headed, and as you move through the agenda, make it clear to people what it is that you've done. Previewing where you're headed and reviewing what you've done helps provide a sense of accomplishment, a sense of action and movement, and therefore satisfaction on the part of those who are participating. A key element of guiding people through that is to have developed facilitator and participant agendas. A participant agenda is I would say a streamlined agenda like that, the one that you see on the right, that lets attendees know where they're going. This is the agenda that you distribute to everyone attending the meeting. The facilitator agenda is for the person leading the meeting and potentially a timekeeper as well if you have someone there that really supports the meeting leader as he or she orchestrates how the group will get through the agenda on the day that everyone meets. As you can see on the left, it can provide greater level of detail regarding the activities and the contributions of different actors during the meeting and helps someone kind of keep their place as they're moving through the meeting to know exactly where they're at. And it also helps provide a greater context where if you are getting off base and falling behind, you can admit that to the group. You can say, well, we've got a few things we need to get through. We are going to skip something, or we're going to move forward. We're going to cut something short. Or maybe, today's event, we may not finish everything. But with a facilitator agenda, you can see some of those things coming and avoid feeling rushed or hassled or harried at the end of the meeting, feeling that you weren't as efficient or weren't as, you were caught unawares. So a facilitator agenda is something that we highly recommend, and there are examples on the Collaborative Planning Toolkit that we'll be reviewing later. And then the final element of the planning is the process. The facilitation cycle is an ongoing process of brainstorming, prioritization, and consensus. Facilitation is the heart of the collaborative planning process. It's the cycle that allows you to move through your agenda, make meaningful decisions as a group, and take action. And as you can see, the facilitation cycle has 4 separate parts. The brainstorming is where you are building up ideas from the group about a question in your agenda. You record everything that's said by the group on the board. The leader of the facilitator is taking notes that reflect the vitality and the equality of the group by gathering ideas over a relatively limited amount of time, and then moving forward into prioritization, which is an opportunity for the group to refine its thinking. This can be through acclamation. It can be through voting with a show of hands. You can use sticky notes or dots. There's a number of ways to vote and to express preference as you move toward consensus, which is agreement on what the group will carry forward. This allows you to move from one agenda item to the next as you take decisions and revisit any areas of concern where consensus is lacking. It's vital to seek consensus at every step along a facilitation cycle. And remember, looking back at our ground rules, that consensus can range from enthusiastic agreement or all the way to willingness to respect the decision and move forward as a group. I would like to just note that this process is not needed for every single aspect of a meeting agenda. If you're providing information, if you're teaching someone something, if you're helping people understand a program or providing general updates, this process is not needed. But any time that the group must make a collective decision about a path of action, you want to implement this process. So those are the different elements of collaborative planning. Wanted to review those before we dove into the second part of the presentation, which is No Kid Hungry's Collaborative Planning Toolkit. It is our online toolkit through the Center for Best Practices website, and it's linked here. We're going to send out slides, including the linked slide, that is broken into 3 parts. Engaging key stakeholders, that people part we talked about earlier, making sure you have the right folks, creating and managing a plan to bring in additional stakeholders to support summer meals planning, to make sure that folks understand what their roles are and how they can support those plans, and then moving through the summer to the end, wrapping up and renewing commitments so that you keep that momentum from one year to the next. The first piece we have is the Engaging Key Stakeholders section. This section provides ideas. It's a brainstorming tool that helps you make sure all of your bases are covered and gives you great examples to model. It provides a list of key collaborators, questions to help identify unique contributors in a community that can be as diverse as WIC clinics, as school districts, transportation agencies, rural development agencies. It's really, dependent on the community, there's almost a limitless list of folks that you can consider. In specific communities, you may find that some are more relevant than others, but this section on engaging key stakeholders, by providing case studies from Virginia and Michigan and providing a general guide to help folks think through the different assets that may be present in their community, helps you to identify those unique contributors that you can bring to the table to support planning, so that you're not doing it all on your own. We know that's often where people struggle, is when they feel isolated and they don't feel like they have the resources within their organization that they need to implement a strong meals program. By engaging key stakeholders, you're able to identify people in the community, people who are already there, who may have access to existing resources that are underutilized, or they may know about other income or funding or resource streams that you can plug into to strengthen your program. Noticing there that we have a couple of case studies from Virginia, from Detroit. So there are kind of pulled out case studies there, and you can see in the example of Michigan, you can actually click in for an in-depth case study that provides additional information. The second section that actually has a lot of collateral is creating and managing the plan. We know that the process of planning is as important as the plan itself. Share Our Strength has developed a planning process that takes a planning meeting from the preparation stage when you're getting ready to convene a group through the actual development of a final shared plan. This section of the toolkit includes tips, templates, and guides that you'll need to host a planning meeting, develop a final plan, and keep collaborators engaged and on point to carry out the plan. We have three subsections of the creating and managing the plan section. We have resources for the overall process, resources for pulling together a planning meeting, and resources to finalize and manage the plan. And you can see there broken out are the explicit resources in each section, all the way from developing an effective summer plan and a planning framework, down through sample agendas, invitations, materials, checklists, facilitator guides, and planning worksheets. And then finally at the bottom, we even have template plans and PowerPoint presentations and check-in agendas to help you continue follow-up as you move through your plan and as you implement it through the summer months. I want to provide a couple of examples. These are examples of documents that we have in this section of creating and managing the plan. Pre-meeting agenda and sample invitation are just two examples. Most of the documents that we have on file are actually Word versions that can easily be modified for use in your community. So most of these are not PDF documents that you actually can't go in and edit. You can include specific information about when and where the meetings will occur, who is leading the meetings. You can include information about attendees, while at the same time having access to a structure, a pre-planned structure that helps you not just have a blank page to start from, but gives you something to work with. And again, we encourage people to adapt these to their context, but simply provide them as tools and as supports so that this process can be carried out as efficiently and effectively as possible. Moving on to the third section of the online toolkit, we have wrapping up and renewing commitment. This section provides resources to help you hold a summer debrief meeting at the end of the summer that will help you learn from experience, hear what happened, what people did or saw that went well, maybe some things that were challenging, and it helps you also to retain and build up existing sponsors and partnerships. We know that over time, the ability to retain partnerships, to retain sponsors, to build institutional knowledge within summer meals programs, among sponsors themselves, but also within communities, is key to program sustainability. We also know that as the same actors are engaged in this process year over year, that helps build the credibility and the knowledge of the program within families and with children who would benefit from the program, which can also, again, help boost participation. One of the things that we know is that program access can be a barrier to participation, but also the awareness of the program. By retaining sponsors, by continuing to strengthen and develop partnerships over time, we're able to offset that lack of knowledge about programs. We have a number of resources for debrief meetings. We have an invitation, a sample invitation, and a facilitator's guide, and a full draft agenda that folks can use to hold a summer debrief meeting. We also have a pulled out case study from No Kid Hungry, North Carolina, to help people understand how meetings like these can help us maximize our learnings, retain learnings from the activities that we've been engaged in, and at the same time start planning very early on for the year to come. We all know with summer meals that it's never too early to start planning, and sometimes the best place to start new, to get new ideas and to develop new initiatives is out of the fresh learning from the year that's passed. So the wrapping up and renewing commitment section helps us celebrate successes, capture important feedback, and engage and retain sponsors and stakeholders for continued planning. Moving on to our third section, we're going to look at collaboration in action. And before I turn it over to our guest speakers, Just want to note that there are some key venues for summer meals collaborative planning. Just to name a few, we have community anti-hunger coalitions, regional sponsor councils, and summer debrief and planning sessions. With anti-hunger coalitions in many communities, you may be able to connect the work with summer meals to anti-hunger work already underway in communities, to existing coalitions. You can leverage additional resources within these coalitions by connecting the dots between their overarching goal and purpose to that of summer meals. You can be a part of impactful gatherings that already have a previously established momentum. And in the best case scenario, there may even be opportunities to operate permanently or semi-permanently within existing structures by establishing summer meals work groups or subcommittees, as we'll hear from Sue Graff from the United Way of Windham County shortly. So by tapping into community anti-hunger coalitions, it's a way to not reinvent the wheel and to say, okay, we want to focus in our community on summer meals. Are there resources or networks that we can tap into that are already existing that we could support and that could help further our work? There's also the example of regional sponsor councils, which we'll hear from in Virginia, which is an explicit initiative to bring together sponsors from different parts of the state, from different communities, from different counties or regions, to develop capacity through specific trainings, to establish and implement priority activities that can be established at the level of the region or established at the state level and then implemented by region, that can include peer mentoring, and can also include focuses on areas like rural development, libraries, or other key initiatives. This is an opportunity for sponsors to gather, to talk among themselves, to have support from backbone organizations such as anti-hunger groups or state agencies, to evaluate progress and to decide upon next steps for the year to come. A third area where you can effectively include collaboration as part of your process for supporting summer meals is with summer debrief or planning sessions, which are often organized in the fall, winter, or spring in collaboration with state agencies that can be implemented at the state level, but also occasionally at the regional level, especially in some of our states that are larger. And honestly, I've even seen, with summer debrief and planning sessions, even large sponsors can occasionally come together in concert with the numerous sites that they serve and or community partners to be very deliberate and ask questions about what's working, what are the barriers to participation, and how can we, as one or more sponsors, better serve you. So there are a number of ways, looking at community anti-hunger coalitions, sponsor councils, and debrief and planning sessions, that we can imagine that collaborative planning would be an appropriate activity to better support sponsors, better pursue partnerships, and work toward improved outcomes in reaching kids with meals where they live, learn, and play. Without further ado, I want to go ahead and transition to our first speaker. Sue Graff is the Director of Community Investments at the United Way of Windham County. She oversees the community impact work of the United Way of Windham County and provides oversight to the community impact grant process, working with area nonprofit organizations who seek and receive funding. She represents the United Way of Windham County at many coalitions and also convenes the bi-monthly United at Work employer work group. She's a certified results-based accountability trainer and has also provided RBA, results-based accountability training statewide as part of Benchmarks for a Better Vermont, a federally funded 2-year project. Sue has a master's degree in nonprofit management from the New School's Milano School of International Affairs, Management and Urban Policy, and she moved to Vermont in 2005 from Hoboken, New Jersey with her husband and 2 daughters. With over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit sector, she's worked in areas including development, program coordination, volunteer management, and consulting work. And we've brought her here today to talk about the impact model of collaboration that the United Way of Windham County has implemented in partnership with folks in the state. Sue, we look forward to hearing your story. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Derek. And I want to thank No Kid Hungry and your Center for Best Practices. I've used your materials in the work that we do, and they're extremely valuable, especially with a relatively small rural community and needing to really leverage some national resources. And I look forward to digging into the collaborative planning toolkit as well. It seems like a very valuable resource. So thank you for your work. I wanted to give people a sense of where we are. So there's a map on my first slide here of Windham County, which is in the southeastern corner of Vermont, if you haven't been here. It's a mostly rural county of 23 towns with a total population of about 40,000 people, so just to get a scope. And We do the work around hunger and summer meals under the umbrella of Hope for Windham County, where we are investing in initiatives related to health, opportunity, prosperity, and education. And in this model, which is very outward-facing and really deals with complex community issues, we're looking at the whole county, what its needs are, and then particular strategies that can address those needs. So certainly, under the auspices of Hope for Windham County, particularly in our prosperity area, we've articulated some community outcomes, one of which is around basic needs, and it's all people have access to an adequate supply of nutritious food. So the work that we do, any work that we do related to hunger or food connects to that community outcome. And it reminds us of why we're doing what we're doing and kind of echoes back to some of the things you mentioned in terms of organizing a group and keeping an eye on the prize, if you will. So that outcome, that community outcome, is the stake that we've put in the ground to say we're going to engage in efforts with community partners in order to ensure that people in Windham County have access to an adequate supply of nutritious food. So the summer meal program obviously connects to that and fits into that. So that was on the next slide. So that's sort of the ends that we're looking at. So in a results-based accountability model, the ends justify the means. And so you look first at what you want to do and then how you're going to get there. And so if we look at the next slide, it talks about the means. So how do we get to all people having an adequate supply of nutritious food? And it's certainly not up to United Way alone. And that's why I love the collaborative planning model as well, because that's how we operate naturally. So how we get there is certainly program accountability. So we look at who we partner with in the programs that we take on ourselves and how they're operating. So certainly as the convener of the summer food subcommittee of our local hunger council, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, we're looking at how is the summer food program doing? Are we are we increasing our sites? Are we increasing our meals? Things like that. And then impact strategies are larger collections of actions. So that's where our participation in our regional Hunger Council really fits in to say, yes, the summer meal program can have an impact on hunger for the children that participate, but there are larger strategies, more inclusive of the whole community, that we can also engage with to address the larger systemic issue of hunger. So the next slide talks a little bit more about specifically United Way and how the means that we use to get to these community outcomes. So I wanted to give you kind of big picture, and then we'll drill down a little bit. So certainly applying the various resources at our disposal to any particular area, and those resources include staff time, collaboration, any expertise we have or our volunteers have, volunteer time, certainly our convening power. So again, that's where we come to play in convening and facilitating the summer food subcommittee. I'm not an expert on the summer food program, so when we get to the Q&A portion, I'll be less knowledgeable about the ins and outs of summer meals, because my role is really as the convener and bringing the right people to the table and facilitating the conversation and the moving forward. So a lot of what Derek covered in terms of those agendas and how to manage that process is really my responsibility. Relationships are a resource as well. We leverage the relationships we have and that we've built across all of the issues we work on, and we bring them to bear on particular issues. So certainly summer meals is a great example of that, with working with local town government, school systems, on and on, media partners, data analysis. So if we can look at, again, county-wide information as well as programmatic data. We do some strategic grant making. So if we are identifying hunger and looking at who are the specific partners and what are they doing, and is there somebody who has a unique role in the community that we can resource with some funding to do a better job or expand their services, we want to do that. And then certainly advocacy and public policy is again another resource in our toolkit that we bring to bear on any community issue. So just a sense of kind of how we operate, and if you have a United Way in your community, these hopefully sound familiar. So again, we do this work under the prosperity, the P in hope, and just to get a sense of the different other initiatives that relate to prosperity, it is also about financial stability. So it goes from basic needs through employment, transportation, things like that. How do people have what they need to be sustainable? And so the Hunger Council of Windham County and our participation there is a key part of how we connect to the food and hunger issues in our community. So in this work, we also look at sort of how are we doing at a county level. So some of the data that we look at, and I just gave you some examples of Vermont and local and statewide examples. Just also as a reminder, when Derek talks about connecting to existing resources, we certainly don't have the data capacity to be tracking information at a county level on our own. We rely on our partners to do that. So thankfully, there are some great data resources, including Hunger Free Vermont, which is really the statewide specialist in this area, and that they convene our Hunger Council. So they're the equivalent, I would say, to Share Our Strength, here in Vermont in terms of being a statewide partner and having those resources. So that's where we get the information we use to get people to the table and get everybody on the same page and agree that certainly addressing hunger and hunger among children is really a key priority for us. So the next slide just shows an example of, again, some of the countywide data. This should look familiar, but free and reduced lunch numbers, enrollment numbers in the 4 supervisory unions in our county. So we track, again, countywide information, and oftentimes we need to track it by supervisory union. And so this is, again, an indication, and like all data, it has multiple uses, but certainly to see, we want to see enrollment increase. We want more students to be fed and to be identified as eligible for free and reduced lunch. And here in Vermont, if you're eligible for reduced lunch, you get free lunch. So there've been some great strides in universal meals and some other ways to deliver meals to students. And so, but we also know that increases in those numbers of free and reduced lunch also indicate poverty. So we want to be mindful of that. And then again, the next page is about Hunger Free Vermont and their resources around looking at the county and really putting the issue of hunger into a context. And so that's invaluable to us. And so, as I said, they do convene, Hunger Free Vermont convenes our Hunger Council. It was launched here in our region in 2011, and it's the executive director of our United Way was its co-chair for the first 3 years. And the vision of that council is really to increase access to food and decrease the stigma of hunger. And so out of that work came a summer food subcommittee that I have chaired for the last couple of years. And summer meals and out-of-school time meals have always been a priority of the council in that articulated vision of really wanting to increase access to food. And so the work of that committee expanded pretty quickly away from, looking just at summer or meeting just in the summertime to really meeting year-round and looking at, again, in this collaborative planning model, what are the assets and opportunities, how do we understand the issue, how do we build the relationships we need to have in order to do a good job and expand the program, how do we develop and leverage resources. So really bringing to the table partners, summer food site coordinators, media partners, early childhood agencies, youth serving organizations, food-related organizations. So again, those partners are the experts in this issue area and have their own relationships that they bring to bear on the issue. And so by convening around one table, we can have a broad-based conversation and really talk strategically about how to develop a program or expand a program or improve how we're delivering services. So that, as the Toolkit review highlighted, having the right people around the table, decision makers, people who can leverage resources on behalf of an issue, and all agreeing that you're here for the same reason, even if you don't always agree on how to get there, is really critical. So reminding folks of that agenda and those goals is really important. And then again, we here in Vermont have a statewide partner in Hunger Free that really does provide a crucial link to data, is a liaison to our Agency of Education, and really does help us maximize some of the opportunities statewide in our region specifically. So they're invaluable. And so being able to connect to, again, the right partners and really be around the same table and be really addressing how we can work most productively together is really the role that that the United Way plays in convening that group and facilitating the subcommittee. And I think that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Sue, thank you so much. And we have your contact information up there, also unitedwaywindham.org, opportunity to learn more about the work of Sue and her team. Do have a couple follow-up questions. We'll probably get some from the audience, and I know I certainly have some as well. But before we do that, I want to transition over to Ellen Eichenbaum from No Kid Hungry, Virginia, who's going to cover another example of collaborative planning with the regional sponsor councils. Ellen is the Operations Associate for No Kid Hungry, Virginia, and she supports No Kid Hungry, Virginia's work across school breakfast, summer, and after-school meal programs by providing technical assistance and working directly with providers to expand participation and improve overall program quality. Prior to joining the team at No Kid Hungry, Virginia, she completed a coordinated Master of Science in Public Health Registered Dietitian program at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Children's Nutritional Behavior from the University of Maryland, College Park. Ellen, thanks so much. I have heard a lot about your work, and I'm very excited to have you share it with everyone here today. So thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Great. Thanks, Derek. Hi, everyone. As Derek mentioned, I'm Ellen, and I work for the No Kid Hungry, Virginia campaign based down in Richmond. And today I'm going to share with you all how we use the regional sponsor councils in our SFSP collaborative planning. Next slide. First, why even use this initiative? Why sponsor councils? Well, it's a great way to get sponsors and partners get them together consistently throughout the year. We typically hold quarterly meetings, which allows for best practice sharing to occur during the full calendar year rather than just right before summer starts and during the summer. It engages sponsors consistently throughout the year and nudges them a bit to plan early on for next summer's programs. While we focus on best practice sharing and collaboration, these meetings are also a great opportunity to talk through challenges with sponsors. And so we can kind of brainstorm some solutions to some of those challenges. And who came up with this idea? Well, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. So the idea came from the Center for Best Practices staff. So our former No Kid Hungry Virginia State Director, Eddie, he heard about it from the No Kid Hungry Center for Best Practices staff and started it before I joined the team. Next slide. How exactly did they start in Virginia? Well, it was a lot easier than you all might think. First and foremost, we worked with the Virginia Department of Health. So definitely work with your state agency that administers the SFSP in your state. In order to figure out the regions to hold these sponsor council meetings in, we use the health district map, which you will see on this slide. And then we separate it out into 4 regions. But if your state is smaller or bigger, you can do more regions, smaller regions. It all depends on what works for you guys. But people who live all the way out in Southwest Virginia, we weren't going to ask them to come to Richmond for a meeting. And so after we separated out the state into 4 regions, we set up the meetings in the 4 regions, and we've held them at different kinds of meeting spaces. So it could be at a food bank or a school board office or a library, wherever there's a convenient meeting room. We got the list of SFSP sponsors from the Department of Health. We emailed everyone an invitation. And I'll get into more of the logistics of the meetings on the next slide. But just to sum up the whole process, work with your state agency, get a list of the sponsors in the state, separate out your state into regions, and then invite them via email. All right, now you can move on to the next slide. So here are some key steps involved before, during, and after. And so as I mentioned in the slide before, work with your state agency that administers the program. Very important to have them there because they work directly with sponsors and they're key to the program running smoothly. They also will know more answers likely to like certain programmatic questions that we just don't know the specifics on. And schedule the regional meetings at least 1 month out. We typically schedule them more than a month out, and then we try to invite sponsors about 3 to 4 weeks ahead of time. We used Eventbrite at our last round of sponsor council meetings just to keep track of RSVPs. But if just them emailing you works well, it can also work that way. And so, of course, it might be hard to know the number of people coming to the meetings before your first round of sponsor council meetings. So I would suggest planning for a larger group. And so you just never know how many sponsors might actually respond to the invitation and want to come and start planning. But after you have your first round or two of meetings, you'll know about the number of attendees that you will likely get at future meetings. So we try to use incentives when we invite sponsors, and these incentives can be up to you guys. So one thing could be a fun bag, maybe a Ziploc bag with chalk and jump ropes for summer programs, or a banner for their next summer's SFSP. Incentives do work, so I would suggest using them to get sponsors to come and talk with you and share best practices. I've tried to follow up with sponsors I know who are usually engaged by phone, so if they didn't respond to email, I'll probably try to call them a week or two before the meeting if I haven't heard from them. And then at the meetings, we try to engage with sponsors during the whole meeting, and you'll see some agendas in the next slide. But in terms of engaging with them, we always have introductions and icebreakers, and at least 2 activities where we get sponsors talking with each other, because they don't just want to listen to us or the Department of Health rambling on for an hour and a half. And so one of the examples would be sharing evaluation takeaways, or sharing their favorite part of this past summer, or if you have them set goals, you could have everyone share their goals with each other. It is great because sometimes one sponsor will share, and this did happen at one of our, I think our November meeting, that one sponsor was saying how their lunch service for the summer was at noon, but parents weren't waking up in time to bring their kids to the site, and so many kids just weren't getting fed a lunch this past summer. And then another sponsor who was at that meeting shared how she just pushed back her service time to 3 p.m., and that increased participation a ton. So some sponsors didn't even realize that you could change your service time in the middle of the summer. And so that's where it comes in handy that the Department of Health is right there, and they can say, yes, that's okay, you can do that in order to reach more kids. In terms of materials for these meetings, I should have included a bullet on here about, oh, sorry, you can go back. I should have included a bullet on the materials. So we used to give out binders that included a bunch of materials, including the agenda and maybe some resources for them and contact information. And it kind of helps if you have the binders and can do that, because then you can refer to something you talked about at the last meeting, at the current meeting. But recently we've just been using folders that are packed full of resources, either from the Center for Best Practices or our resources. And after these meetings are done, I send a follow-up email to all attendees and the key takeaways and next steps. And so in this follow-up email, it'll pretty much just be like themes that were discussed at the meeting. And then if one resource was suggested or brought up a lot, then I'll attach that resource. Or if we don't even have that resource, I'll try to put something together to send out to all of the sponsors. Now you can move on to the next slide. So now we are going to see some sample resources. This is our August agenda. I apologize, it's so tiny for all of you. If any of you want any of the resources, I am more than happy to send them out. And I think Derek is working on kind of adapting them for a national audience. So on this agenda, you will see that it starts off with welcome and orientation, so kind of like introduction, icebreaker, ground rules, that kind of thing. Then we move into an activity where we shared lows and highs from the summer. The next one, we moved into data, and so during August we did not have the meal count because it was just August. So this kind of data was the number of sponsors, number of sites, that kind of thing. Whatever we had that we could share, we did. And then we talked about evaluations and lessons learned, so kind of key steps in evaluating your program, since it was August and it was towards the end of the summer, so prime time for evaluation. And then we introduced our peer mentorship program. So in those folders I mentioned that they all get at the sponsor council meetings, I had a little matchmaker survey. And so I had sponsors fill out what they were interested in learning about, what they felt like they could provide advice on, the number of years they were a sponsor, that kind of thing. And then those who opted into the program, we matched them up via email a few months, or like a month or two later. And this mentorship program is just a means for best practice sharing in a one-on-one kind of way. And so we have a Connect with Your Peer Day once a month on the last day of every month, and then there are incentives. So if they engage with one another, there are incentives for them. And then you'll see towards the end of this agenda, we talked about how to keep feeding children with CACSP through the school year. And then we talked about advocacy and CNR, that kind of thing. And at the end of every meeting, I always ask sponsors for what they would like to discuss at future meetings, just because I want their input. If there's something they're dying to talk about, we should include it on the next meeting. And if we can't include it in the next meeting, then maybe we'll do a webinar about it. And so that's our August agenda. On our November agenda, it was very similar. We talked about our site survey results because we made a survey for sponsors to send out to the site, and the results were super positive, and so it was great sharing those results with them in November. We also did a goal-setting activity, and so we had sponsors set goals. You can actually advance to the next slide, and you'll see that goal-setting worksheet. So you'll see the third resource is the goal-setting worksheet, and so that was in their folders, and we gave them about 10 minutes to set goals, and they could work with us, so the No Kid Hungry Virginia folks who were there, the Virginia Department of Health folks who were there, and we asked them to set any kind of goals they want. We provided suggestions, but we had some awesome goals set, and I am going to follow up with them in February and March on their goals. So some examples of the goals were adding 2 library sites, piloting a meal tracking software, making sure all of the trainings for the sites are done by June 1st, increasing participation at a site by 20%, that kind of thing. And the first 2 resources on this slide are our sponsor council mission and plan. And so it kind of lays out the mission, the objectives, what we would like of sponsors, that kind of thing. And then on the one in the middle, you'll see the timeline. And so we kind of map out when the meetings are. As I mentioned, they are quarterly, or we try to hold them quarterly. And then we'll intersperse some webinars in between. Other resources that we've handed out at meetings were proactive planning for summer sponsors, a handout on that kind of maps out everything they should be doing each month. And so in our November meetings, we discussed the Mobile Meals Playbook. We discussed budgeting and using the average eligibility mapper. And Derek helped us make that resource, the proactive planning for sponsors. We've given out the site survey results. We've given out resources that just have a snapshot of the website. In case we didn't have audiovisual equipment at the meetings, then things we're referring to the website, we can give them a snapshot of it so that when they're home, or not home, when they're in their offices and trying to look up the different things we suggested, they at least will know what it looks like. But I think that is about it. I apologize for talking so quickly. I wanted to fit everything in. Thanks again for having me share all of our details on sponsor councils. And you're more than welcome to email me or call me with any questions about anything I mentioned today.
Thank you so much, Ellen, and for being willing to connect directly with folks that are on the call today. I also just want to make a note to folks that we are developing resources in line with the regional sponsor councils for a national audience, so keep an eye out for those, which will be forthcoming within the Collaborative Planning Toolkit. The best way to stay updated about the availability of these resources is to subscribe to our What's New newsletter. If you go to the Center for Best Practices homepage, you'll see in the top right a subscribe button, and that is where we push out information about new resources, including webinars, but also other printed resources and those that are available on our website. So Sue and Ellen, want to thank both of you for talking today about specific ways that folks can get involved and implement collaborative planning. Some of the key takeaways that we want to remind folks of and kind of come back to is that having the right people in the room really matters, and that having the right people as a part of your collaborative planning work group directly correlates to your ability to achieve your goals. Collaboration is a process. It is not a one-off meeting. It is not a one-and-done event. It really takes ongoing communication, ongoing decision-making, and follow-through with a group of stakeholders in a community. Planning does take time. As Ellen and Sue mentioned, these are things that occur over months and years, and you build up that strategy, you build up the momentum, you build up the buy-in in the community. Follow-through to create a plan is one thing, but to manage it and implement and to follow up over time and at the end of the summer is really important. And it's okay to learn as you go. Don't be intimidated by this. There's no perfect way to operate a collaborative planning work group. There's no perfect way to implement collaborative planning in your community. And so, what we really want people to feel is to feel encouraged and inspired, but also empowered and to feel competent to be able to do this. And that, we all learn as we go, and that is a part of this process. And that is, in fact, the thing that allows us to improve over time. So I want to turn it over to questions and answers. We've got about 5 minutes left. Had a question that had come in, and someone had said, this all sounds really interesting. I don't necessarily feel comfortable leading a collaborative planning work group, although I think it's important to have one. What do I do now? I would point to an example of a state where I worked with folks where the state agency had worked with a nonprofit to express interest in the collaborative planning work group, but the state agency wasn't quite sure that they were the right folks to lead that process. And so in speaking with the anti-hunger group and the state agency, we really asked a few questions. Who has the capacity to take this on? Who has the capacity, as Ellen mentioned, to reach out to folks for a meeting, to convene a group, to do all the planning to set the agenda, to do follow-up and project management? Who had the capacity to do that? Who had the sustained interest in doing so and felt like it aligned closely with their ongoing mission and the work that they did every day? And who had specific staff that either had skills in this area or could commit time and energy to developing skills in collaborative planning? And what they decided was that the anti-hunger group would become the backbone of the organization, of the collaborative planning work group, with support from the state agency. So much like Ellen said, having the state agency there lends credibility. It allows you to get answers about the program in real time, but it made more sense for the anti-hunger group to really take the lead. So, you do not have to necessarily be the leader. There may be someone else in the community that can be a lead facilitator or can provide resources to be a backbone organization. But there is also, by bringing the energy and the enthusiasm to initiate this planning, you can be really successful in helping move summer meals forward. And with that question, we did have another one come in for Ellen. Ellen, let me read it to you here. Do you have any advice on engaging the state agency effectively to promote sponsor councils?
That is an interesting question. I would say that we fortunately had a very good experience working with the state agency in terms of promoting sponsor councils. If you have a good relationship with them, I would hope that they would help you guys in promoting the sponsor councils, but maybe sitting down and making sure they're working with you so it's like an even shared strategy among No Kid Hungry, the partner, and then also the state agency. Maybe then they'll be more interested in promoting it to sponsors.
That's great, Ellen. Thanks. So basically just coming to them with the idea, coming to them with the initiative, and trying to engage them early on. That's great. Thank you. We'd love to have more time for questions, but we had a very full webinar today, so we're going to go on to our final slide. I want to thank everyone for joining us today and encouraging you to tune in again next month. On Tuesday, February 21st at 2 p.m. Eastern, we'll have an invitation that will go out through our What's New newsletter to register, where we're going to cover mobile meals and solutions utilizing hub and spoke models, utilizing mobile truck routes, but also different approaches that can be adapted to different communities and, in line with what we've talked about today, leverage the unique assets that a community may have. So join us on Tuesday, February 21st at 2 p.m. We'll have a good roster of speakers, and we look forward to everyone joining us again for the webinar in February, where we'll continue our Schools Out Foods In series. Thanks so much. Have a nice day. Again, if you ever have any questions, feel free to contact us. Visit our website, bestpractices.nokidhungry.org, and by email, bestpractices@strength.org. Thank you very much. Bye.